And now we'll start with the afternoon session. It's a very intense session. We have many speakers, and we'll try to keep the pace. The first session will be about the maturity of BIM and see how we can interpret what is the way we need to approach to know how we are doing with our BIM project. Noelia Alonso will be the facilitator of this session. She's a civil engineer by the Universidad de Cantabria. Her professional career is linked to design and monitoring railway constructions, specialized in tunnels. But we have invited her specifically because she is the coordinator of the international G5 task force within the National BIM Commission, the S.BIM, that was created in order to address the BIM implementation in Spain with an international focus. So thank you so much, Noelia, for being here. You have a great panel of experts in your hands. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you so much to the organizers for having invited us to be part of these sessions. As Ignacio said, I think we have a great panel of experts here. So I will introduce each of them. First of all, we have Bilal Sukar, who is a strategic BIM consultant with extensive experience in BIM performance assessment. And he is also a professor at the Newcastle University, where he has been working with BIM. After working in the construction industry in Australia and the Middle East, Bilal established Change Agents AEC in 2004, which is a consultancy focused on a strategic BIM implementation. In 2009, Change Agents developed BIM Excellence, which is an innovative way to improve the performance of individuals, organizations, projects, and teams. He has participated in many industry-wide initiatives, and he has led many corporate and public workshops in Australia, US, UK, China, Malaysia, Singapore, and Brazil. Afterwards, we'll have his presentation, introduction to, his presentation we have on screen.
Okay. It's going to be a tough job after lunch. I'm going to hopefully keep you awake. No promises. Today's session is about BIM performance assessment. There's a lot to discuss. This gives you an indication of some of the things I'm going to cover, but I'm going to cover them very, very quickly. So we're going to go through what is BIM performance assessment, what is benefits of organization assessment, how to structure the assessment, and we're going to look at a couple of assessment methods that you may find beneficial. So I'm hoping that this session would be a little bit different to what you've listened to, all the good presentations that you've heard before. So this is a little bit different. This looks, if you want, post-BIM, post-implementation, and how would we really understand if an organization has implemented BIM in the right way. It gives you a couple of tools and methods for you to use in establishing whether an organization is at a high level of capability or not. And two methods I'm going to introduce for you today, something called staged, another one called continuous. So I'm just going to go directly into it. There's some kind of glitch there. So introduction. What is BIM performance? So quickly, BIM performance is a term which includes lots of metrics. So when we say BIM performance on its own without defining it, really we don't understand anything. We're not really sure what are we discussing. So I'm going to introduce a few of these metrics. We can't, of course, cover them in detail today, but just quickly. So we're looking at all these metrics that looks at the availability, deliverables of individuals, organizations, projects, and teams. I'm hoping later on you will have access to these slides. I'm not going to focus on very specific things. So what are the benefits of organizational assessment? I'm going to use here a term called competency assessment, which is different to capability maturity. So there are many, many benefits of competency assessment. Training, to identify, mostly really to have a clear picture of the availability and distribution of competencies of individuals. Also, when we're looking at capability maturity, another term, we look at if there's any bottlenecks within a company, an organization, there's untapped potential, or there's any gaps that need to be filled. So how do you structure an organizational assessment? There's many, many, many ways. I'm just going to cover a couple of things, but before we do that, these are the types of things that we typically measure. So you've got here on the left, what to assess. You've got the single individual, the person, a team of individuals. You've got organizational unit, the whole enterprise. Each one of these, are different. It is different, so they have different metrics. And on the right, you have all these metrics: competency, compatibility, capability, maturity, compliance, etc. For today, I'm just going to focus on these terms: competency, capability, maturity, and when we're looking at project itself on the metrics, something called richness. So one way of structuring an assessment is through some kind of hierarchy. So we look at an organization or an enterprise as made of all these multiple smaller organizational units. So look at that puzzle at the top. So imagine this is an enterprise with a branch in Barcelona, another one in Madrid, a third one in Melbourne. And we want to assess or want to establish the performance of this organization. We can't just look at it as a whole. We have to break it down into its individual units. So we look at each branch separately. That's one way of doing it. And in each branch, we look at several metrics: organizational systems, competency of individuals, and the performance as based on projects. So another way of looking at it, if we look at, we structure this assessment based on business streams. So you could have one for infrastructure, another one for mining. Each company is different. But it's very important that before we start assessing an organization, which is the focus of our discussion today, is that we have to have a structure. So this is another type of structure. We can assess by business line and then combine these assessments into the enterprise. Assessment methods. I'm going to introduce two of these methods. One's called staged, and another one's called continuous. Both of them are good. They have their own strengths and weaknesses. The major difference between these two is that a stage assessment will have a fixed target. So you are measuring against a fixed target. While the continuous assessment, it's a moving target. And I'll explain what that is in a second. One is easy to implement, and I'm going to give you links to templates that you can download and use freely. While the continuous is a little bit harder and needs a little bit more specialized tools. So let's look at staged method. Now, you know, of course, this diagram covered by Mark before, and it's one of the most famous diagrams, which is the UK BIM levels, which are really, in my book, they are more like compliance milestones. So a company can comply with UK level 2 or 3 in the future, while there's another metric I use for performance milestones, which is measuring against the capability of an organization, there's metrics that we can use to measure. We're going to focus, of course, not on compliance in this session, we're looking at performance. So in looking at performance, there's a couple of metrics I want to introduce. One is called capability stages, another one called maturity levels. So please remember, when I use the term maturity and maturity level, has nothing to do with the UK BIM levels, okay? So what are these capability stages? Really, it is about saying that these are the performance milestones that can be achieved by organizations and teams. So we're looking at performance milestones, things that we can measure, and actually they refer to the minimum ability of an organization. The things that we can detect in an organization and we can measure to say that these are at a certain capability, BIM capability. So it is just simply saying that it is impossible to go from pre-BIM, the status before BIM, from CAD and sketching, to something really highly integrated, something that integrates all the mechanical, all the structural, all the benefits from all the data and links to all other databases. It is impossible. And if anyone will say that they are directly jump from pre-BIM to this, you will know that there's something suspicious about that claim. Actually, all organizations pass through a staged approach. It doesn't have to use the same naming I'm going to use, but they go through a certain approach as they go from pre-BIM to what I call post-BIM. So from pre-BIM, there's these 3 stages, and there's post-BIM. So I'm going to cover these just quickly. So object-based modeling is when a company starts to use software like Revit, ArchiCAD, Tekla, etc., but they're doing it on their own. Model-based collaboration, when these companies start to exchange these models, but the relationship between them is one-to-one. And the third is network-based integration. This is where there is some kind of network, some kind of software as a service, a model server that helps to integrate all these models together and to share the data. And there's something very important. It's something called post-BIM. Some of the things we heard today, really, I would classify them as post-BIM. This is where there's no longer a need for a model, and all our focus would be on data. I can't cover this in detail, but let's say that we have pre-BIM, before BIM, and there's something coming after BIM. BIM is not the end of the improvement in the performance of the organization or the industry. There are steps to go, of course, from pre-BIM to modeling, from modeling to collaboration, from collaboration to integration, and then to post-BIM. Many of these things are published. They are in academic journals. They are available on my blog. There's videos. There's some of this material has already been translated into Spanish, Italian, French. Now we're working on German, Arabic, and I don't know what. So please feel free to go and have a look. So that's the first metric, capability, which is the minimum ability. So I can look at a company and say, what is its minimum ability? Are they still at modeling? They're still modeling without collaborating? Or are they collaborating? They're exchanging these models, okay? Or are they integrating these models together, okay? But on its own, it doesn't really tell you the quality of these, of this modeling or the collaboration or the integration. That's why we need another metric. We need to apply it on these capability stages, and we refer to these as maturity levels. And maturity levels really refers to the excellence in the performance of an organization. So whether these deliverables are of high quality, and are they repeatable? Meaning, of course, you can work with an organization, they will give you beautiful deliverables, but let's say the next time you work with them, they give you less than good deliverables. So really, when we're discussing maturity, we are discussing a kind of quality, repeatability, and because of repeatability, you get predictability. So when a client works with an engineer which has high maturity, it means that the deliverables are predictable. We can tell that they will be at high quality. So these are the 5 maturity levels. It goes from ad hoc, or just initial. There's no real maturity. They just have the minimum ability, so they can generate models. They can train their people. We can look at that. Then they go to defined, which is they have these processes defined. They are written down. We can look at them. We can see if rather than they train people when they ask them to, there is a certain process written down who should receive training on what topics. And we've got managed. There's someone taking care of this process for all these different areas of capability, integrated when all these things are joined together, and then optimize continuous improvement. This is too much really to get to understand in such a short session, so I really invite you to look at some of the published works. Again, to move between these different maturity levels, we've got these areas between them, which also we can measure. Again, more videos, more translations. A template, there's a template. You can download it in English. It's also available in Portuguese. Hopefully in the future, we'll also, through some of our partners, to have that available for you for Spanish, in Spanish and other languages. Please feel free to use that. And I know many companies that use that internally to assess their own capability maturity. Again, once you have these metrics, you can generate charts. So this is just a sample of these charts. You can generate your own charts by measuring the capability within a unit and then the maturity. Now, looking at a completely different method, which is the continuous method. As a reminder, we said that the staged method, we are, let's say, measuring, if we're measuring for compliance, we can look at the company and say, are they compliant with UK level 2 or in the future UK level 3? We can measure that by measuring against its the components within that level. Do they follow PAS 1192-2? Do they follow the security protocols, etc.? Or if we're measuring not compliance performance, we can measure them if they are modeling, they're collaborating, etc., and at what level of maturity. When it comes to continuous method, we have really 3 steps. We have first establish the current status. We have to assess the current status of an organization. We have to define a future target. And then we have to identify the best route to get there. And this is the best route, not the shortest route. And there's a bit of a difference between them. Meaning, if we want to assess a company using the continuous method, we don't really look at capability stages. We do not look at something like the UK levels. We look at their own targets or the targets of their client. Where they are at the moment, we can assess that, establish something called a profile, and then we can assess where they want to go as a company, or as if the client says to them, I want you to deliver that project becomes a target. We can identify what that is, and then we measure their performance and see what the gaps are. Once we establish what the gaps are, we can fill them. Now, very important difference between the 2 types of assessment is that this type of assessment needs something called inventories. You need to have something to measure against. You need actually hundreds and thousands of these competency items that we need in order to establish the current competency and to establish a target. So I'll give you a couple of examples. There's something called the competency items inventory. This is a large list of, of abilities. So what does a structural engineer need? What are the competencies needed from a structural engineer or an architect or a facility manager or an employer owner? We can identify what these are. And another type of inventory is the model uses inventory, which really is focused on assessing projects. Give you quick examples of both. So this on the left here, you see the competency items. There is a large list of items. For example, this is a typical competency item: maintain BIM models or generating using standardized protocols. Just to give you an example, all professions have either common competencies or unique competencies. So when we say BIM, there's certain things that every profession and every specialty need to have, okay, which we can define. But there are also things that are specific to a structural engineer or quantity surveyor or whoever, or facility manager. And by having these listed and measure people against them, we can see if they have the ability or they don't have the ability. On the right side, here you see the model uses, which is really, if you want to describe a project, how do you describe it and measure against it? You need something that as a deliverable. And this I refer to as model uses, like asset maintenance and asset tracking, etc. This is based on research. There's a framework. It's published. Please have a look. So these are just a couple of tools and templates. So this is a tool I've developed called BIM Excellence, and it measures the competency of individuals against a metric called the Individual Competency Index, also published. So this is a competency on the left, and there's a measurement. There's another module for measuring the capability of organizations, a little bit more detail there. You can, based on that assessment, you can generate all these charts and compare companies to each other or against the benchmark, or to compare a company against its old benchmarks. Again, once you have this data, you can generate any kind of chart you need. This is just a typical example of working with a client, where the client says, I wouldn't use the continuous first stage with the client, but say, I want to work with someone who can deliver to this project. So you analyze the project and see what it's made of, what are the types of capabilities needed to deliver this type of project, and then you can assess the supply chain against that target. So really here, when you see 100%, it means 100% of the requirements of that specific client on that specific project. This is the difference between these different types of methods. This is very, very specific. Sample project assessment based on model uses. So this is, model uses, there's defined 73 of them for BIM and construction all. You can find them and their definitions if you go to the something called bimdictionary.com. There's lots of links at the end. So model uses, I'm going to spare you this. They're categorized. A couple of charts. So really here you can measure a project and say what are the model uses needed for that project. This project needs clash detection, needs 2D out of 3D, of course. It needs asset maintenance, whatever. And it can generate a chart. You can generate a chart. You don't have to use this type of graphics, but identify what are the model uses. And by knowing this is your target, you can then assess the capability of the team and see their competency according to these targets. And you can see here a comparison between what the client wants and what the team can deliver. So certain areas are really low, other areas are high, and in a perfect world, you will need all these model uses required by the client to be matched by the team. So bringing it all together, this is the last set of slides. Here, you need a method. You don't have to follow this method, but any method you follow will be according to something similar. You have to start with the scoping, understand how you subdivide your organization based on the hierarchy I mentioned, based on the business stream, based on any kind of structure. Based on that, you conduct the assessment using templates, paper templates, online tools, whatever. It doesn't really matter. It just needs to be structured. And based on the assessment, you do the analysis. What does this data, what's it giving us? And then based on that, you plan what you need to do. Okay, we've discovered these gaps. Now we need to plan to fill these gaps. You create these plans, and upon that, you act. You deliver the training, you buy the software, etc., in order to close the performance gap. And optionally, you measure against the scoping. You've done the planning, you've done the acting, but did the performance improve or not? You need to measure against the scope. You started from this, you ended with that. Is there an improvement or not? So without having these 6 approaches, you can't really have accurate data to act upon. Summary, these are the same ones, and thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Bilal. Now we have Rob Garvey, who will talk about BIM adoption in the UK for the BIM for SME perspective. Rob is a senior lecturer and research fellow at the University of Westminster. He teaches on the undergraduate and postgraduate courses. He actually works also on a PhD investigating the influence of government policy in the adoption of BIM. Rob is also the chair of the London BIM region and core team member of BIM for SME. And before going into the academia, he spent 20 years in industry working with Macy on projects like the Terminal 5. As a chartered quantity surveyor, Rob specializes in all commercial aspects of both project and organizational management. Last year's CIOB Innovation and Training and Education Awards, he was honored for an integrated BIM project that involved industry, also students from all the departments within the Faculty of Architecture.
Everyone, thank you for the opportunity to present at the European BIM Summit. I'm here representing the BIM for SME group today, and what I'm going to do is give you an overview of BIM adoption in the UK from the BIM for SME perspective. And I'm going to do this by explaining the role that the BIM for SME play within the BIM community, the UK BIM community. I'm then going to touch on what we've talked about a few times so far about achieving level 2 BIM and the compliance of that, and how SMEs can actually use the standards that are available. And then I'll finish up with an overview of what happens next, or what is happening next. So firstly, just a little bit about me. This is my graphical CV. Whilst I'm representing the BIM for SME now, I am actually a senior lecturer at the University of Westminster, and I have been for 5 years. Prior to that, I had 20-odd years in industry, working for the likes of Mason, working on projects like Terminal 5, and it was on Terminal 5 that I came across the single model environment, which is what we now sort of call BIM. So that's where I started to get into it, but my BIM journey really started when I went into academia, and I realised that actually there wasn't anything being done in academia around this field. And I got involved in the faculty to try and drive things, and as a consequence of that, I've got involved of being the chair of the London BIM region, and I'm also a core member of the BIM for SME. In terms of the chair of the London BIM region, I'm not going to focus too much on that, but certainly from an educational point of view and trying to get and communicate the messages out to a number of people, that group is doing some good work, and we've got some good progress on that. But my focus today is really around the BIM for SME, and that's so what is it they do, and where do they sit within the BIM community. Well, Mark mentioned earlier on about the fact that there are 3 million odd people in the UK that need to be made aware or get engaged with understanding BIM, and to a certain extent the task group have done a lot of work and a lot of good work in trying to set the foundations for that to build on. And this organogram here sort of represents the proliferation of special interest groups that have been formed in line to trying to achieve what the task group have set out to achieve, and widen adoption and implementation of BIM in the UK. This was written sort of about 17 months ago, just after many of these companies, organisations, not companies, but many of these organisations signed a BIM for Community Charter, setting out how they thought they should go about working together and achieving the implementation. If I'm a little bit controversial, I would say that actually the charter was written, and whilst it's got good intentions, it's been largely untended. It hasn't actually moved forward as far as we want. And what you do actually see is that many of these groups are working well individually within their own sort of areas, but we're not coming together as effectively as we could. And that is being addressed, and there are attempts to try and harmonise the work across all these groups, so that we are addressing the key themes that need to be addressed, and that we do work forward. But I'll touch a little bit more on that in the final slide. But sort of coming back to the organogram and what we've got here, this doesn't actually represent all the groups, because this one here sort of just says the BIM regions. There are 15 BIM regions, and that is actually growing. So again, it's a point in time, this organogram, but it is moving. This graph and this image here represents the block for the BIM for SME. So the BIM for SME, like most of these groups, are actually made up of volunteers. And in the case of the BIM for SME, there are 14 core members and quite a few associates and affiliates that join into that. So what do we actually do? Well, this is our purpose and our objective as we state. And I think what I would say in terms of the way that the BIM for SME have moved forward is that we've developed and cultivated an approach based on sort of clearly setting out some good basic management of what we're really trying to achieve in a mission and vision. And in doing so, we've become a well-organised group with a robust infrastructure, communication channels and a reasonable outreach. We've made a commitment to contribute approximately 20 hours per month. We hold regular meetings using virtual platforms, so we are all over the country. We're not all in one location, we are all over the country. As I say, regular meetings are focused around certain issues. And this all supports us in focusing our efforts in as productive way as possible. So what is it we actually do? Well, this slide sort of captures some of those points, and I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about the BIM clinic and the awards in a moment. But Bilal's just been talking about measurement. We've worked with Arab Associates with their maturity measure, and we promote that with organisations that want to engage with us, understand where they're at, and all the things that Bilal was saying in that sort of sense is what we're trying to do with organisations that come to us. It is very much a tool that enables them to assess where they are now, okay, and give them some indication of what they need to do to progress, whether it's level 2 or beyond. We've also participated in the roadmap for within the BSI for developing a roadmap for data and process management within the built environment. So we've got links into those groups. And then in the corner over there, it's an awards plaque, because we actually sort of see competitions as being a really good way of engaging members of the community, as it were, in getting involved in a BIM project in a non-threatening environment, if you like. And so this was a 48-hour competition in New York. And again, so that's not just members that are part of the core group or anything. It is organisations that have come along and said, right, okay, what do we need to do to get involved? And that was very much led by an architect who hadn't really done anything with BIM. And they worked collaboratively with the structural engineers, the cost consultants, etc. And we won one of the awards. Up in the top left corner there, you've got SKTP, which stands for Super KTP, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. So I mentioned awards. We see awards as being a way of promoting good practice amongst anybody that's involved in BIM, but principally the SMEs. So this was held for the first time last year. We're running it again in September. We've done this in collaboration with the RICS, the Chartered Institution of Surveyors. And with their backing, we're sort of very much trying to get more promotion around that, get more companies involved. The key thing from our perspective is, A, it does promote the companies that are involved, okay, and that's good for them. It also gives good case study information that we're able to use and promote sort of success around what's happening. So look out for that. Anybody, it's not UK specific, it can be open to anybody to get involved. In terms of the BIM clinics are one of the things that we sort of pride ourselves on in trying to sort of get out there, sort of communicate with organisations that are either just starting their journey or not. Last year we held 4 events. We're looking to do a few more this year. But it really is giving the opportunity as an open forum for organisations to come in and talk with us and ask questions, etc. And we generally do that aligned to when we're organising face-to-face sessions with ourselves. The next one actually takes place before the next London BIM region event on the 2nd of March. So I mentioned SKTP. So SKTP stands for the Super KTP, and KTP is a knowledge transfer partnership. And this is where companies are able to access research funds to develop a pertinent area within their business in partnership with a local academic institution. And as you can imagine, there's quite a few companies out there that have looked to engage with academic institutions to develop in areas of BIM. So, for example, there is a KTP with a cladding company that wants to understand how does it take that design information and integrate it into its production process. The funds are often principally used to employ a research associate. And within the BIM for SME, we realised that there were quite a few of these KTPs around, and they were all sort of struggling because they were involved in their own specific bit, and what they required was some sort of link to a project and how they could do that. So the BIM for SME took on the role of creating a virtual project, and we set out the objective to deliver a virtual BIM Level 2 project. And ultimately, that is what all the central government departments are required to do in accordance with the UK BIM mandate. So we were very much trying to go through and understand what was involved in achieving and complying with that and delivering the employer's information requirements. Although I would say that in terms of going through this, and Mark sort of mentioned it earlier on about the security documentation and stuff like that, that it's a lot more than just the EIRs. So, repeating what Mark put forward, as he said, there's those 8 documents and the 8 standards that have been put forward around what does BIM Level 2 actually mean. Well, the BIM for SME team have acted as the client on this, and we were very much trying to follow and align with the RIBA plan of work and achieve and understand the documentation that needed to be pulled together in accordance with Stage 0. We started in September, hoping to be able to get that done by the end of November, and like all these things, we were hopelessly unrealistic in that, and we are just about to move into stage 1. And in part that was because the more you get into this, the more you actually understand how much work is involved in trying to pull these documents together. In terms of what we're doing and how we're sharing our learning, we are sharing our learning each month. There is a website with information, so we've got a newsletter which articulates the key lessons and a short video presentation of our progress and learning. So in terms of, this is one of the information cycles. This comes out of one of the PAS standards, so PAS 1192 Part 2. So up in the top left-hand corner, it's very much indicating the employer's information requirements up there. I think what, earlier on, people were talking about the BIM execution plans and the importance of getting a good BIM execution plan. I couldn't agree more, but actually a good BIM execution plan is going to be written by having a good employer's information requirements in the first instance. And our learning really, as we've been going through this, is, well, where do we actually need to start on this journey? And I think the next slide sort of gives you some sort of indication that employers' information requirements are where it starts in this document, but actually you've got AIR and OIR. I can promise you the different information requirement documents become quite difficult to say, particularly when you've got all the different dialects across the UK as well. But you very much start with your organisational information requirements, so that's the organisation, what they're trying to achieve. That informs what the asset information requirements are driving, which drives the employer's information requirements, and that in turn drives the BIM execution plan. And I think the key learning that we've got out of this, and we very much started thinking that we were trying to create the employer's information requirements, but similarly, once we've created these documents, we were then looking at a lot more detail about the PAS 1192 Part 5 and the security documentation that's involved, and we've had to go back and revisit that information. So it's a learning process. There is no right or wrong where you just pull it off the shelf and say that's it, it's all working. So we're learning that, and we've pulled that together. And I think what we've taken from this is the amount of work that is involved in trying to develop the capability and the competence in achieving the BIM Level 2 compliance. Without being... there's some good stuff here in all these standards, and I think that's one of the key points that we really want to try and get across. And it's using those standards that becomes important, and we've got to drive forward on that. So just sort of wrapping up really and sort of moving on, we've taken a lot of learning out of what we've done, and the BIM for SME have moved forward on that. In terms of moving forward even further, Mark referenced the Digital Build Britain report, and that's very much sort of setting out the strategy to level 3 and beyond. And in terms of what the BIM for SME recognises, yeah, absolutely, we've got to understand what that means. And we launched the Digital to All initiative earlier on this month. And that is where we're looking to, as we said earlier on, sort of all the different special interest groups and the proliferation of those, trying to come together as a more cohesive and coherent set of organisations that have got a common understanding of what we're really trying to achieve, not just for us as organisations, but in order that we can get that message out, don't send confusing messages out to the large number of people that need to understand what's going on. So I'm just going to bring that to a close there. Hopefully that's given you a sort of flavour of what's happening, to give you some idea of what's happening in the UK BIM community, and specifically around what's happening in the BIM for SME. I'll sort of echo what was mentioned earlier on, in that we are at a really important time, and this is a window that we've really got to take. We've got to embrace the opportunity that BIM has created for us, and I think if we can do that, we can really influence positive change in the way that the construction industry not only delivers for its clients, but also for those working within the industry as well. Thank you for listening.
Gracias, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. Now, to close this session, we have Tommy Hentinen, who will talk about the BIM experience in Finland. Tommy Hentinen is a senior partner in Gravicon OE, and he currently works as Director of Research and Development and BIM. Gravicon provides everything in BIM, from modeling to project management. He was one of the pioneers of BIM in Finland since 2002. He has worked with IFC data exchange in real-life projects, and his BIM-related tasks have covered everything from architectural design to BIM project management, as well as software development. The knowledge of BIM in Finland has grown significantly during the past 15 years, and Tommy has been one of the leaders of this development. Together with his team, he has participated in more than 60 real projects using free BIM and other standards. From the early pilots to current projects, the mission has been to make BIM more accessible to all parties and to create benefits for all of them. Since the year 2009, he is the president of Building Smart Finland and a member of the board in Building Smart Nordic. In the year 2014, the Building Information Foundation, RTS, granted him the Golden Order of Merit for his efforts in turning Building Smart Finland into home of BIM in Finland. Now he will talk about BIM in Finland from theory to practice.
How are you doing? Enjoying a siesta? I hope she said good things about me. I didn't understand a word. I would like to start by thanking our translators. They are doing an amazing job. The BIM, yeah. BIM is probably not the easiest subject to translate. If you look at all the abbreviations we have there. Yeah, my name is Tommy Hentinen, and I'm a trained architect, and for the past 15, 20 years, I've been doing quite intensive BIM work. For the 10 past years now, working as a BIM coordinator, and together with my 7 architects team, we have been now coordinating more than 70 BIM projects in Finland and a couple of outside Finland as well. And at the moment, the total worth, the total budget for the projects that we are doing at this moment is 4.5 billion euro. Here are a couple of highlights. As I said, we started the sort of real work 2004. Before that, I had done already some pilot projects, and I remember that my first IFC-based demonstration was 1999. So that's been some journey. As probably mentioned in the introduction, I'm working in a company called Gravicon, which is the founder of the company. And we are doing BIM coordination and some development. I'm also chairman of Building Smart Finland and acting in many roles in Building Smart International. Today, Building Smart Finland is sort of rather user-centric organization, so we are focusing into users and guidelines and helping people to get their BIM done correctly. I will start by asking a question that what is BIM? Ilka and Mark later raised this question also in their presentations. To be honest, more than 90% of the BIM things that I see in international seminars like this, I'm sorry, and elsewhere, are not BIM. They are not BIM for me. So what is BIM? Without standards, BIM is just a model. With standards, BIM could be information. And for me, and for everybody in Finland, BIM is open standards. So we need a platform, we need standards to communicate and collaborate. It's not, for me, if there's a nice 3D model done in any of the authoring applications, that maybe it has some information inside, but if you can't deliver that information through open standard, it's not really a BIM for me. And why? Because if that information is just inside that application, that piece of software, it is very close to what are drawings. They are human readable. Somebody has to sort of open a book or go to the architect and ask, okay, what is this property? What does this parameter mean? Or go to that manufacturer who has produced that object in the library. What does this parameter mean? We need standards in order to get the BIM to machine readable. And for me, BIM is machine readable information. The information that we can automatically or semi-automatically read from the models. And it needs to be same. It needs to be structurized. It needs to be harmonized. So where are we? In Finland, we have a saying, seeing is believing, so I'm not going to talk you about what we are going to do. I'm going to explain what we have done and where we are at the moment. And to be honest, we are in a tornado phase in this scheme. The BIM is really booming in Finland. Last year, our company alone, turnover grew more than 40%, and we are doing just BIM coordination. The whole industry within BIM is growing at the moment. And I believe that within 3 or 5 years we get bored. BIM is not a big thing anymore. We need to find out something more exciting. It becomes mainstream, everyday life. And I think that within 5 years, nobody's actually, at least in Finland, nobody's actually talking about BIM anymore. Who is talking about CAD these days? Is that an issue? We did this with CAD. Not an issue. At least not in Finland. It's just a tool. So what we do today, we are using BIM in all stages except one, which I really regret. We are not really good in maintenance, so the FM side is still waiting to happen. But the other parts of the process, I think that we are good. In some parts, we are really good. The designers, I think that they are really good in what they do, basically. Procurement, quantity takeoffs, construction scheduling, production planning, that kind of thing. They're quite good. In construction, of course, there are some companies who haven't even heard about BIM yet. Very few, I would say, at least in Finland. But most of the large companies, they are utilizing BIM in very many levels today. As I said, the weakest point in this, like facing the maintenance, the FM hasn't really happened yet, BIM-based FM. So that's something that we look forward to see, and that will be the next big thing. As I said, the consultants, architects and engineers, they are really good. Clients, well, they are still the weakest link. They think that they know, but they don't. Or sometimes they even know that they don't know, which is better, obviously. Construction companies, they are really production-oriented. The problem is that they don't know anything about design. That's sad, because they have, for the design, they place some kind of requirements, or requirements that are not really proper ones for the phase, or not are not really up to the design phase. But when it comes to construction, they are really good. In training, the universities and companies themselves have worked quite well, and there's a lot of training and education done in Finland for the BIM and BIM management. We don't have any official certification, and Building Smart International is actually working at the moment to build up international certification criteria. So we will probably see and how that turns out and follow that. If we look a little bit closer to the different sectors, in public sector, most of the clients have some kind of plan to do BIM, at least in long term. Then they have some out-of-scope projects like very small renovations. You are just painting some walls. Maybe BIM is not for that purpose. Private sector clients, they are probably not that good. The knowledge of BIM and sort of but they are sort of going there all the time, more and more. Architects and engineers, we did a study some time ago. 67% said that they are already using. Of course, they are lying. At least some of them. In 5 years, they said 27% said that. Okay, in 5 years, that I believe. 6% said that no plans. Well, they have plans for retirement. Construction companies, the large ones, as I said, they are doing BIM all the time. Some of the small ones are really advanced in BIM. And then we have about half who haven't heard about or have no plans to use BIM in their work. We published 2012. We published what is called Common BIM Requirements. This is now also translated to Spanish language, so you can Building Smart website from Building Smart Finnish website. You can find the link, and maybe the Building Smart people here can provide that information also, where you can find that. And this set of documents really sort of improved the quality of BIM. The process was really improved a lot. Even though it doesn't go into very detail, it doesn't go to properties, what kind of properties you should deliver. It sort of harmonizes the ways we do BIM. And in that, it has been really successful. It was almost like a click of the switch that over one night, everybody just sort of threw away their old BIM guidelines and started to use this GoBIM. So it's been very good. It's not perfect. We need to improve it, but it's a very good start. And we have added some appendixes already. So there is some more detailed information. And for example, we are using a lot of prefab elements in Finland. So there is guidelines for creating concrete prefabs with BIM. Well, does it sound good? Of course, we have challenges. It's not that like dancing on roses. So we still have some problems or challenges. The document-based process against BIM-based process, we need to sort of go and see, for example, our procurements, our agreements, design agreements, and see how this would fit better to BIM process, because BIM certainly changes the process. And in Finland, particularly, we have a tendency to sort of solve problems with technology. Hey, there's this new gadget. Let's use it. What is it for? I don't know, but it looks good. And many times you just get more problems if you don't know how to use the technology. So the transformation from the old CAD to BIM has been really bigger than shifting from blueprints to CAD was back in 90s. Project management, that's one of our challenges, and unrealistic goals. you hope that the architect or the engineers will provide the information automatically. Just push the button and you will have everything. Well, you don't. You have to sort of define what you want. If you ask for everything, you will get nothing. So, to summarize, it works. Especially IFC works. We started 2004. I started to work with the Music Center project in Helsinki. The BIM and IFC didn't work. 7 years later, when we handed over the project, it worked. What had happened in the middle? Well, IFC was exactly the same. We were using exactly the same version of IFC, but the applications have improved. So the BIM knowledge and skills and application software, they're getting better and better all the time. That's improving the quality. But of course, we still need there's still a lot of things to do. The penetration in the maintenance is not very good. The collaboration between the building and infrastructure design doesn't work that well. We have different tools, we have different measurement systems. And of course, there's limitations in technology, even though they are not that big. They are quite small ones, but still there are some. And our processes need to be revised. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, yo creo que tenemos.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've got still 5 minutes left for Q&As if someone wants to raise their questions. Okay, fine. Well, then I am going to ask something.
They don't want to ask, I will make one for the three of you. As we have seen your experience in different countries. I would like to ask you, in which phase of design, procurement, construction, or maintenance do you think was the most difficult one it was a big challenge for BIM implementation?
The most difficult one, obviously, is the FM. It hasn't been solved yet. The easiest one is actually construction because it's really straightforward. The design is really sort of, because it's moving around, things are not there. And in early stages, it's very sort of schematic, and in later stages, you should have more information. And there was in one presentation, for example, it was mentioned that you should have these generic objects, and what's the sort of, what is generic object compared to the product itself, and so there's a lot of that kind of problems. But yeah, so construction works, design, yeah, maybe. FM, no.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to add one thing. Maybe easier not to think of the whole life cycle as just design, construction, and operation. It might be better, and I highly recommend that you subdivide it into smaller goals, like if you want to do clash detection, or if you want to do asset maintenance, or want to do any of these smaller parts, and you focus on them, rather than looking at BIM as this big monster, of technologies and all these workflows and standards and whatever. It becomes a bit intimidating. It may be better, depending on the sector, to focus on specific smaller objectives and try to build your own ability in them, rather than looking at it as such a big thing.
I mean, from an SME perspective, I think what we see from companies that are coming to us, part of the biggest challenge is starting, because once you start and you actually get into it, you're not going back. So it doesn't matter which part of the sector you're in that sense, it's getting started, and understanding where you need to start. And I think that sort of aligns to what Bilal says there. What information do you need? Understand that first off, and then what information have you got, and how can you use that information in a more digital format? So starting, I would say, is the hardest part. But once you get, you're not turning back.
Okay, thank you. ¿Alguien se anima? ¿Alguna pregunta más por ahí abajo?
If anyone wants to raise any question.
On one of the presented charts, you showed us that we are in tornado mode right now. And in about 3 to 5 years, we're going to reach a peak. Then we're going to decline. Why is that decline? And what's going to happen 6 to 8 years later? Are we going to use something else? Or is that happening only for Finland? Or you think that's going to be followed by the rest of Europe and countries like the ones that didn't start using BIM as much?
Obviously, it's not going to be the whole Europe or whole world who is going to be in that peak in 3 to 5 years. But as I said, when we started doing CAD back in 19, so beginning of the 19th, that was sort of an issue. But it was the clients even paid extra for architects and engineers to deliver CAD drawings and CAD files. And that same happened when we started using BIM, like back in 2004, 2005, in larger scale in Finland. Nobody's paying extra today. Well, they pay the same maybe that they used to pay. Maybe in 3 to 5 years they're paying less. Hopefully not. But I mean that what I mean that we are at the peak is that then it starts to be business as normal. There is nothing fancy about it. So we just do it.
Nada más. Muchas gracias a todos.
Well, that's it. Thank you very much.